Okay. So yeah, thank you so much for signing up to today's webinar and using your lunch break to come to this today. I hope you'll find it educational and also enjoyable. So my name is Katie. I am the Senior Project Manager here at SOS UK for the Green Impact Programme. So hopefully all of you on the call take part in Green Impact, whatever guise that is. And we wanted to kind of focus on the climate emergency. I'm sure it might be something that you have all heard of before or you've all come across before, and we really wanted to kind of go back to basics on this and like what is the climate emergency and what can organisations, the ones that you will work for, and us as individuals, what can we do? So this is what we're going to go through today, and I just really want to reiterate that this is a friendly space. We're going to be asking you to do some annotations and hear your thoughts. So please, respect other people's opinions and thoughts. How we tackle the climate emergency, everyone's going to have their own different opinions and steps that they want to take to address this. So please don't judge anyone on what we decide to do or what I say that I do as well. And it's just a friendly space, so please feel free to share your thoughts. So I want this to be an interactive session as well. So first things first is, as I said, go back to basics. Let's go back to the climate facts. I think from someone who works within this sector, and I'm sure some of you might also work as sustainability professionals, sometimes these get lost and we forget about what we're working towards. And also if you're not coming from a climate change background, you might have studied at university, but again, I think this is something that once you leave education, it's not something we really think about. So in terms of the science behind climate change, actually it's quite disturbing. The United Nations have said that we only have 10 years left to prevent a climate catastrophe that we are working towards at the moment, and we need drastic change to prevent that from happening. You can see in that photo here, there's actually a clock that was unveiled last month within New York, which is a countdown to the climate catastrophe. They say it's 7 years away. The United Nations have said it's 10 years away. So that is all within our lifetimes that we are going to start seeing huge catastrophes happening. And we're seeing it right now, aren't we? I mean, the wildfires in Australia, California, flooding that we saw in the UK at the start of the year. Hopefully no one that you know was affected by that. But we are starting to see these impacts in the UK now. And we know that the climate science has been telling us that this is purely caused by anthropogenic reasons. So that's us. So what we are doing to cause climate change. So since the Industrial Revolution, our global temperatures have been rising steadily. And the 2019 was actually the second hottest year on record after 2016. So we know that this is something that we have caused. And the biggest cause of this is our burning of greenhouse gases. So for our energy, the way that we travel, the way that we produce materials has the largest impact on climate change. This is science. Some people might dispute the science and say that it's not real, but we respect the scientific community. 95% of scientists are saying that this is the cause of the effects that we're seeing around the world at the moment. So then what I wanted to show you now was a quick video where you can see our global temperatures and how they have started to change over the last century. I mean, you can even see just on this still that it's not respective across every single country, every single continent. The way that climate change is happening is just reportedly affecting different regions. So while some regions might be seeing extremely dry temperatures and droughts, you'll then have other regions who are experiencing extreme flooding. So this isn't going to be affecting all of us in exactly the same way. When I start the video, can I also get a thumbs up from people on the screen if you can see the video? Sometimes it gets a little bit jumpy, so if we can't see it, give me a thumbs down, and then I will stop and we'll just talk through it instead. Okay, so I wanted to show you that again, to just reiterate the differences in temperatures across the world. I don't know if you saw one of them, that across the equator, that huge, it was actually purple, that was how hot the temperatures were on the equator in 2019. And as I said, 2019 was the second hottest year on record, but it might come as, not as a surprise to people that 2020 was worse. I mean, if 2020 couldn't get any worse, it definitely has. So within 2020, September was the world's hottest month on record. So the last month that we've just experienced was the hottest that has ever been recorded. That was globally as well. It wasn't just within one country. But as I said, climate change is affecting people very differently within different regions. I mean, again, in that same month in South Sudan, they are facing a huge humanitarian crisis from the flooding that they have experienced. And then again, that wasn't something that I actually saw in the news, which from someone who follows quite a lot of, news articles about climate change. I think it's actually quite worrying that these headlines aren't making headline news anymore. We're becoming quite desensitized to it, that it's not a something which is surprising to us anymore. These are things that are happening on such a regular occurrence that we're not even picking them up in our news channels anymore. And this one as well is obviously extremely relevant to the times that we're experiencing. So UN report highlights that the biodiversity loss that we are seeing is actually seeing an increase in spread of diseases. We know from COVID-19 that potentially that might have been an animal to human transmission. And I think this then just highlights that, the destruction that we've seen within the Amazon and also within other rainforest regions for our own gain, whether that's palm oil, beef farming, wood, whatever it is, it's our impact on what we buy as consumers that is driving this cause. So I thought I would put this in as an article to link to, because obviously it's such relevant, that all the little things that we do. So sometimes people think that us as individuals can't make an impact. We're the ones that are buying these products. We're the ones that are fueling this. So I thought that was actually really relevant to the current times that we find ourselves in. We've also seen a huge increase in natural disasters this year as well. So this is another one that I, again, had not heard of. When I was in school, I'm sure most of us learned about flooding within Bangladesh. But this year, there was a huge tropical cyclone at the start of the year. So this was an image of India and Bangladesh. And then if I click now, you can see the scale of that flooding. 90% of Bangladesh was flooded this year. And again, that was not something that I had come across in the news. As I said, we're just becoming desensitized to these issues now, that it's not even making the news headlines. Obviously, then COVID-19 just kind of fueled the issues, because when people were being asked to evacuate, the centres that they were being asked to evacuate to, do they take the risk where they just try and wait it out and survive the cyclone, or do they go to a centre where they then could contract COVID-19? So this COVID-19 has obviously just exacerbated the challenges that we're already seeing within these countries, and it's just fueling further humanitarian crises across the globe. And that was one natural disaster that I just wanted to focus on, because I'd just not seen anything on it, and I'm not sure if any of you had seen anything about this either. I can see a few head shaking. So again, we're just not seeing this within the news. I'm sure the wildfires are probably something that we have seen in the news, unsurprisingly, because they're affecting countries in the global north, so like Australia and the USA. Now, again, who's heard of a gigafire? Because I have not heard this terminology before. That is how bad that the fires are in California, that they've had to make a new word to describe the spread and the impact and the severity of these fires. So it's a new classification called the gigafires, just because of the amount of acres that the fires had burnt in California this year. Again, you might have seen this news image. This was from December 2019 within Australasia. The huge wildfires that they saw there. Obviously, they saw this within January, within their summer, and then COVID-19 hit in March. So it's been a pretty rough ride within that country as well. And then the Arctic. Who knew that the Arctic could burn? The wildfires in the Arctic is not something new this year, but is continuing to burn. We've seen wildfires in Russia, and in other areas of the Arctic as well. So, you know, you might think of the Arctic as a cold place where polar bears are, but that has seen significant burning from, obviously it's not been caused by people setting those fires up in the Arctic. It is purely down to the rise in temperatures that they're seeing within that region that these wildfires have started. Now, again, something that I really wanted to touch on is the human effects of climate change. So this was a recent journal article which actually went into quite depth about the drought that Syria experienced, actually exacerbated the civil war that they saw within that country. So again, I don't think it's much that people really think about, is the fact that because they had a drought within the rural regions within Syria, it pushed a lot of people into the cities to find work and to support themselves. So that conflict of people migrating into the cities was one of the contributing factors to the Syrian civil war that we see now. And you know, this isn't just within Syria, it's within Iraq as well. The huge drought that they had in that country, again, saw climate refugees, and so you've had that phrase before, of people coming together, different clashes of cultures, again, exacerbated the conflict that we see within those regions. And then these regions are going to be the ones that are going to be disproportionately affected by climate change. You can see by this map, so it used to be called the fertile region because of the region was just so perfect for growing food. But because of these droughts that have been prolonged over the last few years, the region is completely changing, which is why we're seeing obviously there's other reasons to the conflict, but it's just exacerbating the conflict. So again, hopefully we're aware that climate change disproportionately affects people within different regions. So out of the 4.2 million premature deaths that we saw last year, 91% of those premature deaths occurred in low to middle income countries. So that was when they're looking at air pollution. So air pollution was the factor that caused these premature deaths, but 91% of those premature deaths occurred in lower income countries. So specifically in Southeast Asia and the Western Pacific regions. You know, I myself live in Birmingham, and we had 900 premature deaths last year because of air pollution within Birmingham. So again, it's not just affecting different countries, it's here within the UK as well. I used to live in London and I used to cycle to work, and I can tell you that air pollution there cycling to work was also a little bit grim. And then within the US, a study here, the scientists found that the minority and poorer communities are disproportionately affected by air pollution. So African Americans face the highest impact, with 54% higher health burden compared to other areas of the population. And that was from just systematic racism that they experienced within that country. So when you know, oil rigs were being built, or coal mines, they found that communities were actually in the downwind from those places. So when they were obviously burning the fossil fuels, these regions then where these communities were living, because they were poorer regions, were actually then being affected disproportionately by the air pollution within that region. So again, something that I really just wanted to highlight when we're talking about climate change and these facts, but it's not just us who are being impacted, it's more the lower income and lower income people who are being most disproportionately affected by this. And if you're thinking about air pollution as well, we know that from COVID-19, that those who suffer from pre-existing health conditions are being, again, negatively affected by this disease. And if you then are living in these regions where air pollution is really high, above like what we should be seeing, again, it's just exacerbating. So as I said, all these things really contribute and come together. So now what I want you to do is to get you all thinking, is what I want you to do is on the screen, you should see right at the top of your screen, if you hover over it, is the annotate function. So hover over that, and if you click on text, I really want you to just write on the screen now, like, what are you most concerned about with the climate emergency and ecological crisis? So please just write your thoughts on that screen, and then I'll take a screen grab of this. And I just want us to start thinking. As I said, there's no wrong answer, and we'll respect everybody's comments. So if you click on text rather than the draw function, hopefully that'll be a little bit easier for you to write down your thoughts. Great. Okay, so yeah, if you could make sure that you click on the text function rather than writing, I think it'll be a little bit easier for you to share your thoughts. So thank you so much for that. I mean, from that, I saw predominantly most of you were concerned about biodiversity loss and the impact that it's going to be having on future generations. As I said, we've got those 10 years left to stop this irreversible damage. And I don't know, did anybody watch the David Attenborough extinction documentary? Yeah, I haven't quite got around to watching it yet, but that did cover the threatened what am I trying to say, the impacts that our lives are going to have on biodiversity and nature and animals, and the extent that the extinction might happen. So yeah, that's great. Thank you so much for sharing your thoughts on that. So now what I wanted to kind of go through is how our organisations can tackle the climate emergency. So again, I'd really love to hear your thoughts on this and what you think your organisations are doing. So I've kind of focused on a few. So a few things that you can do within your organisation is declare it a climate emergency. So that is just, while that is just kind of seen as like a bit of a tick box things for people to do, it definitely is super important for people to see that you are taking this seriously and you are declaring that climate emergency. It then gives the impetus for you to then start working on this and what you should be doing. So on this map here, you can see that these are all the local and county councils within the UK who have declared a climate emergency. And now through our work through Green Impact and other schemes, we're working on them and how we can actually start addressing this. So I thought that's quite encouraging to see the amount of councils who have declared that climate emergency. And we also know that universities and a few hospitals as well have declared those emergencies. Another thing as well is your organisations to divest. I don't know if you saw this, but there's a huge win. On the 1st of October, we saw the University of Cambridge agreeing to divest their portfolio of £3.5 billion away from the fossil fuel industries into hopefully renewables. I haven't quite said where they're going to be reinvesting that, but we have a new campaign to encourage them to invest that within renewables. So from our joint campaign with People and Planet, you can see that 84 universities have committed to divest. So that's £15 billion that has been committed to divestment, which is a huge testament to the student activists on campus who've been lobbying their universities and student unions and working with student unions to achieve this huge win. So that is, a huge win for the climate movement that we're seeing. Huge institutions that, £3.5 billion that the university had invested within that is now being divested is such a huge win. So whilst that's a university, that might actually be something that you want to talk about within your own organisations. Pensions is another thing that your organisation, obviously we all have pensions, a lot of pension schemes aren't that ethical, and they might also be investing within fossil fuel companies. So if you wanted to do a bit of research yourselves, that might be something that you might want to be looking into, is the pension schemes that you have within your organisations and whether you could actually move into a more ethical pension scheme. So again, this is a university-specific campaign and for colleges. So apologies for you who aren't on that, but hopefully you still find it interesting. SOS UK have just launched a new campaign called Invest for Change. So this is where we want all of those institutions who have divested to actually invest in ethical and pots that are actually in the interest of students. So what we're going to be doing is we're going to be looking at all of the divestment commitments that university have given, and also their climate commitments as well. So have they said that they're going to be carbon neutral by 2030 or 2040? We're going to be putting a league table up for students to be able to see how their institution is doing within this area, so they can then lobby their institution to bring their climate targets forward to 2030, which is obviously super ambitious. I know that the NHS have just launched their carbon neutrality target of 2040. The NHS is a huge estate and a huge employer, so we think that universities can go quicker. So that's why we're calling universities to be carbon neutral or work towards carbon neutrality by 2030. So that's a brand new campaign that was launched last week. Obviously, within our organisations, we can be huge educational resources as well, not just within universities. Obviously, if you're working within a local council, a students' union, a hospital, how you educate your employees and your students is obviously really key. Now, these are just two that I wanted to focus on, because I think sometimes when people say they declare a climate emergency, as I said before, it's seen as a bit of a tick box of just saying that you think you want to do this, you think it's important, but what are you going to do to try and mitigate the impacts of the climate emergency? So these are two universities, the University of Winchester and Exeter, both declared a climate emergency, but at the same time, they came out with really strong plans about how they're going to tackle this. So even if you're not within the education sector, I would really encourage you to look at the University of Exeter and Winchester's white papers of how they're going to go about reaching their targets. So for Winchester, they would definitely focus on educating their students. So no matter what course the students were studying, whether that's teaching through to maths, through to physics, through to art, they would always be taught about the climate emergency and climate change, because it's not just going to be the geographers and the environmental scientists who need to tackle the climate emergency. It is everybody, and that's why everybody should be taught about this. So by 2021, every graduate will have learned and explored issues relevant to climate change, relevant to their degree. So I thought that was a great example to share. Then within Exeter, they have a huge commitment. They want to reduce their domestic and international flying by 50%. They want to reach carbon neutrality by 2040, and they set out in their white paper exactly what they're going to do to achieve that. So I would 100% encouraging you to have a look at that, because what they have done will obviously replicate into different industries. So another example that I really wanted to show you is from Nottinghamshire Healthcare Trust. So this was at the time of the Black Lives Matter protests. The Trust actually wrote a really comprehensive and amazing news article about how climate change is a racist issue. They then shared that around the Trust and linked to a lot of fantastic resources that they wanted people within the Trust to read and educate themselves. I think a lot of the stuff around the climate emergency is definitely around people being educated to understand what the impact is and how they can go about trying to reduce their impact on that. So we actually do have Cara, who works with Nottinghamshire NHS Trust, on the call now. So Cara, sorry to call on you very last minute. I didn't know if you just wanted to share the reasons why you wanted to release this statement and the impact that it's had within your trust.
Yeah, thanks, Katie. I was trying to work out which resource you'd shared, so this is my guess. So I've been clocking what I might say in my head. Yeah, we felt it was really important, given the relationship between climate change and racism, to say something as an environment department. I'm the environment and engagement officer at Notts Healthcare, so I work in our environmental team. And the purpose of the resource was sort of to say a lot of what Katie's mentioned already about the disproportionate effects of climate change on people of colour in the global south, but also a smaller scale in, within the UK, for example, access to green space is disproportionately less for people of colour. And then the environmental sector itself has a history of being really, really white and doing some things that are not great for minority groups and people of colour across the world. So we wanted to sort of own that and make that something that all of our staff were aware of, because climate change isn't just an environmental issue, it's a social justice issue and it's an economic issue, so it really covers a lot of different things. We got a lot of great responses. There seemed to be a lot of people who were really interested and maybe hadn't heard about climate change discussed in that way. One of the things I'm most excited about from that resource is that I'm speaking to our BME network now. So we have a Black and minority ethnic group within the Trust, and I'm presenting to them and sort of running a workshop next month that's about what we as an environment team can do to better represent the interests of people of colour in our work and make sure that we're really emphasising those environmental justice and environmental racism links in the things that we're doing. I think that's the sort of headlines there.
Great, thank you, Cara, and sorry for calling on you super last minute to talk about this. Thank you so much for that. So that resource is actually in our Green Impact resource bank, so the link is on that. So I really would encourage you to have a look at that, because I definitely think this could be replicated within any of your organisations as a resource that you could be sharing and to start educating people on these issues. So now I just want to focus on like how we can tackle the climate emergency. So what us as individuals can do. So we kind of focused on what we think organisations can do. So around divesting, declaring a climate emergency, setting really strong carbon targets. So carbon neutrality by 2040 or 2030, and then making sure that you're educating your staff on these issues as well and how they can make a change. So first things first, I want you to get out your annotate functions again. As I said, please make sure you try and do text rather than write with the pen, because it's a little bit difficult to read. So what I want you to think about now is, what can we do as individuals to tackle the climate emergency and ecological crisis? I'm sure there must be things that you've already started to do within your everyday lives to try and address this. So I'd be really keen to hear about what you think are the main things that you can work on to try and address these issues. The slides after this, I actually have a couple of examples, great ones on the screen already, that I wanted to talk through, but I'm really great to hear your thoughts. Okay, that's fantastic. Sorry that we've kind of like written over each other, but I know some key things that I saw: eat less meat and dairy, switching your suppliers, then you can lobby your MP, fantastic one. Change your bank. Ethical banking is something that we really should be thinking about, as well as I spoke about before, pensions. Stop fast fashion. Something that really frustrated me, one of the news articles quite recently was that, did you see the article about how billionaires have just got richer through this crisis, which, that is through all of us. Hands up, I'm guilty as well, buying things from Amazon because it was quicker and cheaper than me popping down my local stores. So as I said before, it is us who has these impacts, and I'm really going to try and make a conscious effort coming up to the Christmas holidays to try and shop local. Obviously that's not an option for everybody because it might be more expensive, but that's kind of one personal thing that I'm going to try and do, from seeing the billionaires have just got richer when we've got however many people being made redundant within the UK. So yeah, thank you so much for that, and thank you for your thoughts. Again, okay, so I'm going to stop here. Okay, that's great. So we've stopped annotating now, so thank you so much for that. So what I'm going to move on to now, some of the thoughts that I'd had, and these actually perfectly link on to what some of you have said on that. So first things first, obviously plastic consumption at the moment is such a key topic. The amount of PPE within NHS trusts that we've just had to go through, people wearing disposable masks. So these are just, some of the things that we can try and do to reduce our plastic consumption. And hopefully we've all got reusable masks as well, if you are able to wear them. So someone put on there already is don't bank with Barclays. So I don't know if anyone saw the Extinction Rebellion protests, that Barclays are funding fossil fuel companies. A lot of other banks feel some really, really horrendous things as well. So definitely you can just do a quick Google and see that some other ethical banks that you can change to. I think it's now it's a lot easier to change banks than it was previously. So I definitely would encourage you to do a little bit more research and see what banks actually do have ethical investments. Another thing I saw someone put on there is tell people about it. Absolutely. Sit down with your family and watch the new David Attenborough documentary. There's one on Netflix as well. That's just something that is quite accessible to everybody. So I would encourage you to sit down and have a look at that. said myself, I'm going to try and shop local and to stop fueling and giving more money to these billionaires. So that might be something else you might think about. And I also saw on there as well is take part in Green Impact. Absolutely. All the actions that you do within Green Impact, whether you're in a students' union, you're campaigning to lobby your university to make it 100% renewable energy, whether you're within a hospital working to reduce your plastic consumption or how you work with patients, whether you're in a local council and you're thinking about how you can encourage people to travel to work. Obviously, we're all working from home at the minute, but in the future, it might be something you think about. All the actions that you do within the Green Impact scheme, all the impacts you know, you have within as an individual, within your team, as an organisation. So obviously, please encourage you to keep on, you know, working your way through the Green Impact criteria that you have within these toolkits, because everything that you do is going to add up to make a huge difference. So one other thing I really wanted to refer you to again is the education side. At SOS UK, we've just launched a new resource hub, which is focusing on intersectionality and sustainability. So these are just 3 you can see on the screen. There's also resources around women and sustainability and class and sustainability as well. So that it links to books, articles and videos that you can read through. So I really would encourage you to have a look at that and share those resources within your own organisations as well. So I can kind of share a personal story from SOS UK. We had a campaign about 2-3 years ago now called the Last Straw campaign, which was to, you know, reduce single-use plastic straws within students' unions and universities. You know, we were coming at that from a sustainability point of view to, you know, we saw all the videos of, you know, turtles with straws up their noses and all the impacts that had, but we did not consider intersectionality at all. And that's something that we really learned from that campaign, because we had a lot of disabled students come to us and say, you can't run a campaign like this because we need straws for our purposes. So whether that's we need straws to be able to drink and eat, or plastic cutlery from different reasons, because if we're eating hot food with metal things or drinking soup through metal straws, obviously that's going to be really hot for us to be able to use, so we can't use metal straws. So I just wanted to share a personal story from SOS UK that we've really learned from this. And I would encourage all of you that when you are thinking of sustainability campaign, is to think of all the different groups that you might be impacting through running these campaigns. So that is one of the reasons why we set up this hub, is so people can learn from the mistakes that we have made within our own campaigns. And then finally, one of the things, this is something personally that I went on this year, is the Climate Reality Project. So this is a free training course that you can go on. I mean, usually you have to fly there, which I never know how they got around doing that, having hundreds of people fly to a training course. But this year it was actually all online. And I went on that training course, and it was all about the impacts of climate change. It was all the science behind climate change. And there was a lot of great sessions. So it's a 1-week training course, and it's run by former Vice President Al Gore. So I would encourage you to look at that. You have to apply to be on it. You're then put into a UK group, and then you join the Climate Leadership Corps. So there's like thousands of people across the world who are part of this, and that is one of the reasons why I wanted to run this webinar on the climate emergency, is because I'd forgotten all the facts and I'd forgotten the urgency, and that this training course really brought it back to the forefront of my mind. And through the Green Impact webinar series, we're actually going to be running the presentation that you see from Al Gore in this training session. I'm going to be running it with Stephanie from Kingston University, the sustainability manager there, probably in January time. So I'd encourage you to come on that webinar as well if you're interested in hearing more of the facts behind climate change, because we're running that through this Green Impact webinar series. And something that I just wanted to end on is, you know, some of the things that we've gone through today, some of the things you might research from having this webinar, is obviously it's quite overwhelming, the impacts that we're seeing. I actually went on a webinar 3 weeks ago led by the NHS Trust in Scotland. So it's a Scottish healthcare webinar, and they have actually started to see cases of eco-anxiety among young people being referred to NHS Trust for treatment, which in itself is obviously really concerning, that young people are being so anxious about the climate emergency, that they are starting to be referred for treatment for this. So one thing that I just wanted to flag is at SOS UK we had a workshop about 2 weeks ago by the Force for Nature team about eco-anxiety and how you can try and mitigate that. So this might be a new term that you might have heard just today, eco-anxiety, but I think it's something that we're going to be seeing a lot more about. So if you work within the student movement, within education, I would really encourage you to start looking at resources around eco-anxiety and how you can support students on campus who are potentially campaigning to not kind of get burnout and to not get so anxious about this issue. So that's something as well that I wanted just as a takeaway point, that obviously all of this is quite overwhelming, but to take care of ourselves. So that was everything that I wanted to go through today. I hope that you found it educational and found it useful as well. I just want to see if anyone had any final questions. We said that we'd finish the workshop at 1:15, so a couple of minutes, but just seeing if anyone has any questions at all. Okay, so one second. So if you want to make a comment, if you just make it in the chat box, I think that would be easier. So eco-anxiety is around people feeling anxious about the state of the climate emergency. So, you know, all the things that I kind of just went through about the disproportionate effects that it has on people of colour, of class and women, as well as the impacts that it's going to have within their communities. So, you know, you might have been affected by the flooding this year that we saw in the UK, or you might be from a country that has seen this firsthand as well. So climate anxiety is around like people feeling that the climate emergency is something that they can't have an impact on, and that they feel really helpless about, and it's making them feel like really anxious about as well. So that is what eco-anxiety means. Yes, I'll send out the recording, and I'll send around the presentation as well. So I've got everybody's emails, so I will share that with you. And all of the resources that I've spoken through and all the articles are all in the comment in the notes section of this webinar. So when I share it with you, you can kind of click on the links and start educating yourselves and seeing that as well. Okay, so how can youth in Africa help the climate emergency? So if you are within different countries, if you're a young person, we do have a new campaign called Mock COP. So some of you might have known that the COP that was meant to happen in November, so the Conference of the Parties, has been cancelled because of COVID. So what we are doing at SOS UK is we're working with over 200 climate activists from 40 different countries to run our own Mock COP. So that's all youth activists wanting to show their countries that whilst even though COVID is happening, the climate emergency is not something that they're putting on the back burner. So they are going to be running a 2-week conference from the 19th of November to the 1st of December, and we're currently recruiting delegates from every single country to be represent their nation and their country and what they want their country to do and tackling the climate emergency and ecological crisis. So that's called Mock COP 26. I please would encouraging you to have a look at that. They're actually got a crowdfunder at the moment because they really need extra funding to be able to make the conference happen. So I really would encouraging you to just Google that. So it's just Mock COP 26. I'll put the link, I'll just write it out in the chat box. And that's, yeah, we've got about 16 young people being paid as student staff from all different countries across the world. And so like 40 countries and 200 young people are already involved in that. So that's something that if you are a young person, that might be something that you want to get involved with. Great, I think I've answered everybody's questions now. So I'm going to leave everything there. I hope that you have enjoyed it. I will send around